All right, here we go. Mics are hot. Ready, camera one. Take one. We are rolling. Ready in 3, 2.
This Soonerscoop.com video is streaming in crystal clear 4K resolution on YouTube thanks to Enjoy Vision in Oklahoma City. If you're ready to see the rest of the world just as clearly, get your fresh perspective at Enjoy Vision. Enjoy Vision. This is where Sooner Scoop LASIX. Hello and welcome back, Eddie Radosevich, Josh McQuistion. It's just us two, George, on assignment this Monday afternoon. Welcome into the Soonerscoop.com YouTube channel. A full weekend it was in Norman for Oklahoma, the Future Freaks weekend. It sounds like everything went extremely well. Welcome in, Josh. How are we?
Doing well, Eddie. Tracking these guys down, talking with Chad and Steve. There's a lot to go over here. This was a really positive weekend for Oklahoma.
A lot of vibes coming out of a weekend that you wouldn't think, I guess maybe coming out or going into a season in which there's a lot of question marks surrounding the Oklahoma football program. But all in all, a really good weekend, and it's going to be fun to kind of recap. A lot of names to get into. As you said, Steve Wiltfong and Chad Simmons have basically been conduits of Soonerscoop.com with all the national reach that they've gotten. Make sure you check out Steve Wiltfong's story, just kind of about the entire weekend and the positivity coming out with a number of big names that we will get into here. Before we do so, let us tell you about our friends over at William and Lauren. We've been doing that all year. It seems like you should know them by now here on the Soonerscoop.com YouTube channel. But as the official custom clothier of OU football, William and Lauren outfits your favorite OU players in custom suits that boost their confidence off the field to match their confidence on the field. Their perfectly tailored clothing ensures every Sooner stands out in comfort and style at prices that make luxury accessible. Visit William and Lauren in Oklahoma City or online at williamandlauren.com. That is williamandlauren.com. Got the brick and mortar there in Oklahoma City, as well as one coming soon to the friends up in the 918 in Tulsa. Dress like a champion and make your style as legendary as OU football. And if Oklahoma's able to get any of these guys into a recruiting class into Norman, I'm sure that they will be visiting our friends over at William and Lauren, just as George Stoyle will be doing so here in I think it's a couple weeks before we get into actual wedding festivities for the Stoyas. All right, it sounds like it was a great weekend for Oklahoma, Josh. I guess, and we kind of said it at the beginning, not so much surprising, but it sounds like it was phenomenal for a number of guys in town.
Yeah, and I guess the surprise has worn off because we heard some of this, in the January junior days, Eddie. We were hearing a lot of talk of oh man, everything's just great. And there was none of the, I don't know, there wasn't the gray cloud hanging over things like we thought there might be. And now, with some of the new hires, Ben Arbuckle, obviously, Jim Nagy, some of these stuff that gives Oklahoma a little momentum, gives them something where these kids are reading positive things. It's again, this is stuff where, I'll give you a perfect example. I was talking to a player who's, grown up his entire life as an Oklahoma State fan. His mother's an alum, has always been an OSU fan. And she came away saying, I never thought I'd say this, but I love Oklahoma. There really was that kind of stuff this weekend where you're just like, wow, okay, this is trending a little differently than I expected it to. So again, Oklahoma, and I know we'll go over a lot of individual stuff. 8 new offers went out this weekend that we know of. Maybe there's 1 or 2 that are still being ironed out. That stuff can always happen, but a lot of positive momentum. And again, it's not just, it would be one thing if guys are telling me that we're used to that can happen. But when they're talking to Chad Simmons, they're talking to Steve Wiltfong about, okay, I know I'm coming for an official visit. I don't know when, but we're going to get that ironed out. And that's a lot of what I'm hearing as well are guys that I wasn't sure were coming in are now headed to Norman at some point this summer.
It was a busy weekend, just not in 2026, 2027, 2028. It seemed like there was a host of guys from every class. Obviously, we'll get into a number of these guys. But as you said, let's start with some of the guys that were offered because, obviously it's kind of the new names, if you will. There's some old names that we'll get into here in a second as well. But anybody stick out? I know that we had talked about Titus Hawk on the unofficial 40 going into last week in terms of a kind of a preview going into Future Freaks, but the tight end out of Choctaw did pick up an offer. One of 8, as you said. Who are some of the guys that kind of stuck out to the new offer list?
Obviously Titus is a guy that, we talked about it, picked up a Penn State offer last week. Then the news, he had let me know he'd be at Oklahoma this weekend. And you kind of thought this is probably going to happen. So there was a few in there that maybe I didn't see coming, or maybe were earlier than I anticipated, whatever it may be. He was one you're like, if nothing else happened as far as offers go this week, and I'm pretty confident about him. Again, you watch the guy on tape, and I've got a story that should be up, probably by the time people are seeing this. And he is a big, long, athletic tight end, moves around really well. Choctaw puts him in a lot of different positions. Sometimes he's working vertically, sometimes he's working out in the flats. Like they do a lot, and he gets to show a lot on tape. So he's an interesting kid. Another guy that I have some familiarity with, and for both firsthand and seeing him on tape, is David Thomas, the 2028 wide receiver from Stillwater. Oklahoma's first in-state offer in that 2028 class goes to a guy from Stillwater High whose father actually works for Oklahoma State. So there's going to be some challenges there in that recruitment. There's no question about it. But he's tremendously talented, played a lot for the Pioneers as a freshman, and is that kind of guy that, like, even before he'd taken snaps as a freshman, you were hearing, like, oh, this guy's pretty special. He's a little different. And then, not to make it just a total homer in-state conversation, the Brody Knowles kid from South Lake Carroll is really interesting. Big guy, like 6'4", 190, very physical, really good, like you would expect, high-pointing balls, very much a jump ball guy. It'll be interesting to see over the next couple of years, does he grow into kind of a flex tight end kind of guy? Because he really is. He's a big dude, but he can move around. I'm not saying he can't play receiver, but I think, again, like we talk about so often with Oklahoma, I think he brings some versatility that they're going to like, and they can say, okay, if he grows, fine, we're okay with that. And if not, he's kind of an Ivan Carry-on type of guy.
Maybe, just maybe. And believe me, I'm saying maybe. Is the tight end position at Oklahoma coming back? Are they back, Josh? Obviously, George put up some stuff on from over the weekend, first couple practices. Sounds like Jaron Kanik maybe is making a home at the tight end position. It'll be certainly interesting. Jeremiah Douglas, another guy out of Crandall, Texas, that picked up an offer. Samuel Omosigo, the easy connection there as well, Josh.
Yep. Yeah, a guy that Crandall is a place that you're not always getting by Crandall every year, that kind of thing. But there's no question that, this is a guy. We talk a lot about Emmett Jones and his kind of, sphere of influence. You talk anywhere south of like downtown Dallas to about, I'm trying to think of a place on 45 that's a good marker. Like say Corsicana.
Yeah.
He's gonna know anybody down there that can play in that area. And Crandall's kind of right there, about 20, 30 minutes south of south of the Dallas area. So you obviously, this is a guy that Emmett identified early on. There's no question, and kind of within that Emmett conversation, I think of the 8 players, 5 of them were receivers, 6 of them were receivers. So clearly Emmett came in with an agenda and said, I've got some business I need to do here. And that was, talking to all those guys, they already knew him. Their coaches are familiar with him. So there's just a lot. I don't want to say it's easy for Emmett Jones, but like he has a list before anyone has a list of like the young receivers whenever and whatever region he's recruiting, but particularly Dallas, because he just, you talk about South Oak Cliff, Duncanville, you go down the list and he knows all those guys and on every staff.
I think that George and I were joking about it last Friday on one of the YouTube shows, just in terms of, it seems like every person that we talked to, even some of the new guys that were coming in, even if they weren't in the wide receiver room, Emmett Jones was on the tip of their tongue saying that, he had a connection back to their high school coach. It just seems like he is like a 7 degrees of, I wanted to say Kevin
separation,
Spacey, but separation.
Yeah, 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon. Yeah,
For some reason, I was.
Eddie, I'm surprised that's not too old for you. That's a dated reference, man.
I don't really know what it means, but I know what it means in terms of everybody knowing each other. I get the idea. I get the family tree. Whatever you want to say about that, I get it. All right, let's get into some of the knowns, because I do think that it was obviously a massive weekend. Real quick, it did come out at the end of last week. 2026 quarterback Jaden O'Neal is now a Mustang Bronco, which is kind of fascinating. And on top of that, it was just reported by Steve Wiltfong and Rusty Manziel out of Georgia. Georgia is hosting Jaden O'Neal for a visit today. So do with that what you will. Obviously, that's always going to be connected with Bo Bentley, who was in town over the weekend for Future Freaks. Josh, just, I guess, weekly update. What's going on at 2026 quarterback with one moving into the state, but is he going to end up at Oklahoma even though he's committed to Oklahoma? It just seems like it's a rather confusing process that we'll continue to watch.
Yeah, and frankly, I've spoken to his dad more as of late than I have Jaden, and really more of kind of big picture conversations, not as direct about this. But again, like I get the impression their plan is to be at Oklahoma. Now, I think you'd have to be naive to think, oh, a visit to Georgia doesn't mean anything. That's crazy. Like that just doesn't hold up to anything we know of high school football recruiting. So that's a big story. It shouldn't be a huge surprise. We've kind of hinted that Georgia's going to make a push for him. Georgia's going to take a look at him. And I think really it's going to come down to what happens in several other recruitments. Again, we talked about this last week. Oh, Georgia also got involved with Bo Bentley. So there is, and that's kind of been my contention with this thing all along. There's too many great programs that need a quarterback because we know everybody wants to take at least one every year. So for the idea that Oklahoma was really going to take home two just doesn't really hold up to scrutiny. That doesn't make sense to me. So I think the thing that I will tell OU fans, again, don't like whoever you like. I get that that's the guy you're pulling for. Like, oh, I prefer this guy, or I think this guy's the better guy. Whatever it's going to be, okay, like have that side. But I don't think you have to worry about quarterback recruiting in the 2026 class. I think they're going to get one of these two guys. I think they're both extremely talented players, and it's just kind of what's your flavor? Like what do you prefer? So I think as things go on, I really like what I've heard about Bo Bentley this weekend. His interview with Steve Wiltfong, he talked about, Oklahoma really made it clear to him what a priority he is, and Eddie, we've been saying that for a month or two now.
Sure.
Like it's clear that this isn't just some secondary option thing. And I know some people have tried to kind of write that off and say, oh no, it's just all Jaden O'Neal. No, Oklahoma really likes Bo Bentley. They also really like Jaden O'Neal. So I don't want to minimize either guy. But again, I think Oklahoma is going to be just fine at quarterback. How exactly this plays out, I think that's like we hear people all the time, Eddie, talk about like, oh, recruiting, it's so much more formulaic than it used to be. You don't get the crazy stories. This could be one of those fun stories that we kind of get to watch play out over these next 2 or 3 months and kind of see what happens. And there's a whole bunch of outcomes that I could see playing out.
While we're talking quarterback, they also did play host to I think a name that has become quite familiar with the Oklahoma fan base in 2027 quarterback Peyton Houston out of Evangel Christian. Back on campus yet again. It seems like he's made the trip multiple times now, but first time I believe that he's been able to sit down with Ben Arbuckle and kind of get a better idea of what he's going to do offensively, obviously going to a practice over the weekend.
Yeah, from what I gathered from some of the people I talked to around Norman, it was just a feeling of him starting to really get ingrained with this group. Like that, obviously he knew Seth Luttrell. There was a good relationship there, and he knows a lot of guys already, Brent Venables. He knows a lot of pieces of the staff, but it's him now getting to where, okay, Ben Arbuckle's my guy. This is the guy I'm going to go through for all these things. And I think there's a really good relationship, and Peyton is, again, one of these guys that really does have a nice fit for what Ben Arbuckle does. He's a very skilled passer, but he's also a guy, I think we saw this season, rush. I think he ran for, it almost ended up being 1,000 yards, if I'm not mistaken. So like, it's a guy's very, very capable with his feet. And, we know that to some degree, and you can debate on how big a role Ben Arbuckle wants that to be. We know he wants a guy with mobility. We know he wants that option in his offense. So it seems like that's one of the guys they're really choosing to focus a lot of energy on. But at the same time, Peyton Houston's a national recruit, going to have a lot of attention. And I don't think there's any, I don't think Oklahoma left anything on the table. But at the same time, there's still plenty of work ahead of them here.
Just under 5,200 yards, 45 touchdowns for Peyton Houston this year. We're earning all district honors. You could imagine the list of accolades that he collected. Offensive line wise, it was obviously coming off of what they did a year ago with Michael Fasusi and Ryan Foje and Darius Afalava, Owen Hollenbeck, who were already on campus. It seemed like it was a good list of interior offensive linemen as well. Gene Riordan, back from Hinsdale, Illinois, the number 71st overall player in the 2026 class, alongside Drew Evers, who is out of Flower Mound, obviously Nick's younger brother, but obviously bigger at 6'3.5", 285, as well as some other names that have become, I think, quite familiar for Oklahoma fans. Gerald Mays out of Pflugerville, Weiss High School, Katoa. Our love affair with Katoa continues. Out of Euless Trinity, obviously, and then Tavian Branch out of Pennsylvania was in town this weekend as well.
Yeah, this is it was another really good offensive line group. Even as you get in to some of the younger years, you had Caden Penny from Bixby, the 2027 offensive lineman that was there. And the thing that, like Eddie, it feels like there was a point in time there where there was this conversation of like, is Bill Bedenbaugh too gruff for these kids? Like, can they deal with the way he does things? And every guy I talked to, when I left them an open-ended question, like, what did you enjoy about the visit? What really stood out? And they were like, it was watching Coach B work with the guys. And I was like, oh, really? What was your takeaway from that? And they're like, he pushes his guys. Like, and it was, so you were very much like, okay, if that's what you like, Bill's got plenty of that for you. He's going to be right down your alley.
It warmed my heart a little bit when Derek Simmons was like, I want to be coached hard. And I was like, yes. Well, I think you signed up for the right guy.
Yeah. You found home base. No, again, and it really was. Like, I talked to Gene Riordan, and he talked about just getting to watch him practice and how well, or not how well, how impressed he was with just the finer points, like just Coach B, like, we're going to do this. We're going to step here. We're going to move, when we feel this, we're going to let that guy loose, like all these little details that he's able to watch and really pick up on, which obviously help him be a better player too. But I think he just liked that even early on in spring practice, the finer points are not going to be excused. And I think he's the kind of offensive lineman that liked that. Drew Evers was, and he talked a lot about that. Obviously, he's got a lot of familiarity with Bill. He's been watching practices since before he was in high school. And that was kind of what he talked about, was Oklahoma is just so comfortable for me. Like, I've been there more than any other school. I know it so well. And I think he said something like, it's kind of like coming home. Like, you just know what it feels like and that kind of thing. Now, Drew's been a lot of places. I don't think any, I always say, oh, when they start saying home, that's a good sign. With Drew, it's a little bit unique, so I wouldn't go too far with that. But I think he is a guy that maybe Oklahoma doesn't get mentioned with a lot. And I think that might be wrong. Like, I think they've done a very good job with him. With everything that happened with Nick, you would completely understand if he just wrote Oklahoma off. That's never happened. He seemed very sincere in his interest in Oklahoma. And, I expect him to maybe be back, maybe even once more this spring, but almost certainly for his official visit.
The highest rated prospect on campus for the Future Freaks weekend, Jordan Edmonds out of Marietta Sprayberry High School there in Marietta, Georgia, the number 2 quarterback in the 2026 class, number 17 overall player. What's the realistic expectation here? Oklahoma actually a player for Jordan Edmonds?
When it comes to Georgia, like, I could talk to a kid and his parents for 2 hours, and I wouldn't trust my instinct as much as I trust Chad Simmons. Like, if Chad tells me something's happening in Georgia, something's happening in Georgia. Unfortunately, and it's not that this is from Chad, it's just me reading the tea leaves. I think this is going to come down to Georgia and Alabama. I know that, Chad has mentioned it in several stories. Jordan almost committed about a month ago and it sounded like it was going to be Alabama. He pulled back from that. He's going to take some trips. Now, I think he loved the trip. He's already talking about, I'll be back for an official. He's one of the guys I mentioned earlier, or I guess that I referenced earlier, was saying, I'm going to take an official. I don't know when yet, but he's that kind of guy. So I would expect him to be back in Norman probably, sometime in June. But do I think that they're probably going to beat out Alabama and Georgia in the head start those two programs have? No, I really don't think that's going to be the case. But maybe if numbers fall, maybe if he falls in love with Alabama and they get three corners before he's ready to decide, maybe miracles can happen. But it's a good sign that, again, a kid like this that doesn't have any obvious affiliation to Oklahoma comes in and was still really kind of moved by what he saw and enough that he wants to come back for another trip.
Two more defensive backs that I want to ask you about a little bit closer to home. Let's start with 2026 safety Donovan Webb, four-star defensive back out of Frisco Panther Creek High School, LSU, Oklahoma, TCU, Texas Tech. It sounds like he had a pretty good time over the weekend.
Yeah, from what I gathered, this visit went extremely well. He's already another guy talking about being back. What I will say is he's one of those guys that, and even I, will admit when I feel like I haven't covered a guy well enough, we probably haven't given him enough attention. He's absolutely a guy Oklahoma likes. Kind of a diverse defender. They can do some different stuff with him. So I would watch Webb pretty closely. I think Oklahoma has a real shot there. There's been a lot of LSU talk with him, but again, with a build, if they can build off this visit weekend, and I think there's a chance to build some momentum that maybe they can actually really get in this and maybe make this a pretty interesting race.
What about the, let's go 2027 defensive backs? Obviously, one name a little bit closer to home plays in OK Preps. Bryson Brown out of Owasso. I was really impressed with him when I saw the Rams play a couple times this season, as well as Talon Mayo and Devontae Kirkland. Devontae Kirkland out of Waco, Texas, and then Talon Mayo out of Louisville, Texas.
Yeah, Mayo if he was in the 2026 class, OU would be looking for three in a row at Louisville from Jaden Hardy to Michael Fasusia and now Talon. So from what I have gathered, and he's one of the guys, again, with the list of like 50 guys. I won't claim I've talked to everybody, but I'm through about 25 of the list. And Talon was a guy that was really excited coming in. And when you kind of heard him, I just get the impression he has a lot of esteem for Michael Fasusi, for Jaden Hardy. I mean, obviously those guys were upperclassmen when he was just a pup at Louisville. So I think there's a lot of respect there. And I think from what I've heard from the other side of the fence, sounds like that went well. I would expect him to be back. I know he really likes Jay Valai. There's a good relationship there. So that's a great starting point for him. You mentioned Bryson Brown from Owasso. A guy that really fits Oklahoma well, and big, like you mentioned, seeing him, Eddie. He's a big physical guy.
Yeah.
Like he's not a kind of a lighter 5'10", 180-pound cover guy. Like he wants to get up in your face and jam you and be physical. He's been to Oklahoma a ton. Now he is one of those guys that plays it really. Like he's very active in social media, but he's very smart. He's not going to tell you too much. He's not going to give away what he's thinking. He's pretty smart in how he handles his recruitment. So you can't ever read too much into it. But the fact he's been to Oklahoma so regularly, I think says a lot about his level of interest. And he's a guy that if I was going to think of a player that I thought fit really well with Jay Valai, Bryson Brown is very much of that personality type. They seem like two that would just hit it off very naturally.
Speaking of Jay Valai, his name was actually mentioned with developing or having a pretty good weekend with Jaden Pettit, who's actually a wide receiver out of Naples, Florida, First Baptist Academy. Jaden Pettit, as well as Craig Dandridge, both 2026 wide receivers that were in town over the weekend.
Yeah, Jaden Pettit already, again, one of those guys talking about his official visit. Like he wants to get back. It kind of felt like Daniel Odom when he came in January and was, like it was like, oh, okay, this whole story just changed. He's a good example. Like when I talk about Emmett Jones and the work he does, like he has ideas on ideas on ideas for what that wide receiver room is going to look like. And I think there's almost like a Lord of the Flies to it. Like it just works itself out. Like he's going to let it take care of itself, and the best talent's going to find its way to where he wants it to be. And so I think he's super comfortable with how this is playing out. But yeah, Jaden Pettit is a guy that's already talking about coming back for a visit. I think Oklahoma will get him for an official. And at that point, I mean, I think there's something that could happen. Craig Dandridge, I really like Dandridge on tape a lot. Very explosive, real long, kind of angular guy. I'm trying to think of a good comparison for him, but while I try and rack my brain about that, I talked to Craig a little bit. He loved the visit, really enjoyed himself, talked a lot about just the, getting to talk with the players. That's something that came up a lot with a lot of these guys. I tweeted something about it earlier today where they really did mention this is they talked about getting to talk with guys like Jaden Jackson and David Stone. Gavin Sawchuk was mentioned. Major Melson was mentioned. Like there was a really a variety of players that talked about the soul mission and kind of what Oklahoma is like from a player's point of view. And I
Sure.
think that really resonated with a lot of these guys because it was sincere. It wasn't, a packaged thing. Like I think it was pretty open forum where the guys just got to say what was on their mind. And it hit for a lot of them. I think Craig Danders is one of those guys that really connected with kind of the message.
Who better to sell the program than the guys that are actually kind of going through it? And obviously, they're going through spring football, so you're getting a pretty good, I guess, firsthand account of what to expect or what it's like. While we're on the subject, I should have asked this at the top. Carrie reminded me. What was to be made of Jim Nagy and everything that was thrown out there in terms of was he selling the idea of I can be that conduit. I know how to get guys from here to the NFL.
Well, I was honestly kind of waiting for a guy to bring it up, but now that we've gone a little while, I want to get into those conversations with a few of the guys that I know better, and I feel like we'll kind of, that I know can kind of talk at length about it and kind of like what did he do, what was that like? I kind of thought he would come up more than it has to this point. Now, again, I don't want people to read into that. I don't know what his level of involvement was. He's been on the job for a week. Let's not, I don't want anybody to be like, well, this is a total flop. Like, don't do that. But I did kind of think it would come up. But again, I just really thought the story that I kept coming back to with these guys, and again, I really try to leave it open to you take me where your visit went, and then we'll talk about that stuff. It was the players.
Sure.
Like, it was just over and over again. It was about the players. And, again, and I know people have mixed feelings sometimes about it. The soul mission came up a lot. They really liked, that. Their parents responded to that. I would say as a guy that I want to highlight that really talked about all of the above was Brian Harris, the big defensive lineman from Florida. Brian Harris, Eddie, I was talking to him last night at about 10:30 Central. He was busy making the 17-hour drive back home. He and his father had driven up.
Florida.
Yes, and then drove back down this weekend. I believe he's in school today. Like that was a thing. And you were just like, okay, but I mean, you could tell like he was still just beaming about the trip. Loved everything about it. Really talked about how much getting to talk, I mentioned earlier, David Stone, Jaden Jackson were two guys he really singled out as those guys really connected with me, made me understand why they chose Oklahoma, why football is so important at Oklahoma, why the players are so well connected. I mean, for those who haven't gone to the site and read it, we've got several updates up with multiple guys in each update. And his words, I would think would make any OU fan feel really good about what transpired this weekend.
Sounds like a really positive experience, and maybe this is just another selling point in terms of what Oklahoma's trying to do from a recruiting angle. But a name that continues to come up that was committed and then decommitted, Jonathan Hatton's name continues to come up. I know that we've talked about him here on the recruiting report with you, Josh. Just Oklahoma, it seems like it just won't go away with Jonathan Hatton out of San Antonio Steel High School, as well as another name that came up this weekend out of the running back group. Wayne Shanks out of the Kincaid School down in Houston, down in your area.
Yeah, we'll start with Wayne and work our way to Jonathan Hatton. We'll bait the hook a little bit. With Wayne Shanks, like he was a kid that camped this summer, and I thought he was going to be offered. Well, I say this summer, last summer. I forget how far we've moved from that. And I thought he would pick up an offer then. I thought he was really good, and really was one of the standout running backs for me at camp. Now, we know DeMarco Murray's got tough standards, and that's kind of what Wayne told me coming into this weekend was I was really hoping I was going to get an offer, but I wasn't counting on anything. I didn't know, where exactly I stood and what that was going to mean. So he was absolutely over the moon about the offer. Very excited. I would expect him to be back probably this summer, maybe to camp, maybe just to hang out. But or and there's also of course the late summer events, the barbecue, that kind of stuff. Not the barbecue, but what Sooners Under the Stars or whatever
Sure.
that is. Yeah, late in the summer. So you can keep your eye on him there for sure. Um, in regard to Jonathan Hatton, I OU's like I felt like I was kind of paying it lip service for a while there, but for him to come up and do this, Oklahoma's right there. Like I think people have said this is A&M, and I've got a prediction in for A&M. Like I'm not saying that anybody's more guilty than I am, but Oklahoma is made this very interesting. He really likes Ben Arbuckle. He likes the way Oklahoma's going to use the running backs. Like he understands, how important it could be for him and his development to be a guy who catches the ball out of the backfield, does a lot of different stuff, isn't just a big downhill runner like we all know he can be. So I think he likes the idea of being a kind of a multifaceted player. I still probably lean to A&M, but as to where it was probably 70-30 a couple of weeks ago, probably more like 60-40, 55-45. Like I think Oklahoma's made this interesting. And the thing you've got to remember with Jonathan Hatton, I've said it a lot, but it bears repeating. DeMarco Murray he will flat out tell you that is the coach he is closest to. That is the relationship he seems to value the most. And man, that stuff's hard to overlook when it comes down to the wire and you're making a decision. I know we can talk about NIL and all these other things, but if Oklahoma is competitive in that arena, they've got a chance to win this race.
Torrey Blaylock looked really good when we were over at practice last week for the first spring practice on Thursday. Micah Rhodes, 2028 running back, was in town, as well as a name that maybe is just new to me, not new to you, Josh. Asher Giotto out of Jacksonville, Florida, the Bowles School, a 6'4", 235-pound edge. Interesting.
Yeah, a guy that Oklahoma offered recently, a 2028 guy, big physical guy, really fun to watch on tape. Absolutely from that Brent Venables, Miguel Chavis mold. Like he plays with his hair on fire. He plays 100 miles an hour. All the cliches you want to throw out. Like he is that kind of dude, very aggressive. And when you talk to him, I kind of expected a more lukewarm response about it because he's taken some trips and he's done some things, but he really, I think Oklahoma is off to a really good start with him. Like I think they've done some good work. He really likes Miguel Chavis. He likes Todd Bates. It's one of those things where the connection of Chavis and Bates, where a lot of staffs have a defensive ends coach and they have a defensive line coach and they kind of do their own thing. The fact that Chavis and Bates are clearly friends and like there's a lot of almost tag team recruiting that they do, I think it helps with a lot of guys. And this is probably one of those guys because he loves Chavis's energy and his, how youthful he is. And at the same time, he can look at all the track record that a guy like Bates has and knows like, I'm going to be coached well there. So again, 2028, ridiculously early, but he is absolutely a guy that I think Oklahoma, has reason to have hope going forward with.
Couple of other items to get into here before we get out. If you're recapping Oklahoma's Future Freaks weekend, Caden Jones did put out a tweet, I believe, over the weekend, maybe getting closer and closer to a decision. Maybe that makes some resolution there in the 2026 running back room.
Yeah, that's going to be really interesting because, we're talking about Jonathan Hatton already. Rylan Morris is a guy that we've talked about a lot as of late. I think Oklahoma would like to have two backs in this class. That's always been the impression I've been working under. And I think most years that's kind of where they are, is they'd like to have two because they know there's going to be turnover and transfers out and all those sort of things. About a month ago, this felt like all Oklahoma to me. And I had even heard some rumors that Caden had thought about pulling the trigger kind of back in January. So at the same time, though, there's been some visits he's taken. I know Kansas has really kind of made a run, and I know that will surprise some people, but it does sound like they've made a good impression. I know Louisville has really impressed him at different points. It's just tough for me to believe it's not going to be Oklahoma.
Sure.
But there are some schools that I've fallen prey to this before where like something seemed foregone for years, so that has to be the answer, and you get burned on that from time to time. So I need to check around some more. But the last I'd heard it all seemed pretty positive for Oklahoma and Caden Jones.
So again, it was it seems unanimously positive weekend for Oklahoma on the recruiting trail. You kind of find yourself daydreaming sometimes to think, all right, if they could get everything worked out onto the field and situated, how much further, how much more, I guess better to a certain extent, could this thing get with the product that they're selling right now versus what they want it to be? Should be interesting. But overall, Josh, just kind of closing thoughts. It seems like it was a really successful weekend.
Yeah, Eddie, this is one of those things where it leaves you feeling like, man, if they could have just gotten by at Missouri, if they could just found a couple more wins to where some of the, the gray skies aren't hanging over some of these conversations. You don't have to say yeah, but at the end of every positive sentence about Oklahoma football. It would feel like, because you're like, man, they are in on some really good players. We haven't talked about Caden Hall, the safety from Florida that's going to be in for an official visit. Like, there's a lot of guys still coming in this week. I mean, today, actually, they've got a big-time linebacker from California, Talona Ely, I think is how you say it.
I'm glad that you tried because I could not.
Yeah. Yeah. So they're still attracting plenty of talent. It's just a matter of okay, getting past, okay, you're in the top 10 or the top 7. Are you in the top 3? Can you are you close enough to close this deal is going to be the question. And I think that's going to be the biggest hill to climb. And we talked about it coming out of Under Armour. Obviously a lot of schools are, whispering in these kids' ears and telling them all sorts of things. And that's a battle Oklahoma, to their credit. They know they're going to have to fight that fight. So I think they're prepared for it, and I think they've done a really good job, better than I think could have been reasonably expected. But like I said, now you're starting to move from that territory. Okay, you've laid the groundwork. Now you got to start reeling in some commitments.
That'll be the next step for Oklahoma. That has been a pretty good comprehensive recap of the names to know coming out of Oklahoma's Future Freaks weekend. Anything just in terms of the actual team that you've heard from spring that you want to share? Sounds like it's I don't want to get here yet, but I am excited to see John Mateer throw the football to Giovanni Gibson in coming weeks.
I can't lie. And I put something out over the weekend, just kind of nerding out watching that Giovanni Gibson touchdown throw from John Mateer. And it was, a great, John Mateer, I don't have a lot of doubt about what John Mateer is. I think I'm pretty comfortable with what I expect him to do and be. Giovanni Gibson's one of those variables to me. If he can be the 90th percentile of what his talent says he can be, OU's really got something. Okay, this is a deal where now, okay, you've got him opposite of Deion Burks, and you can't just roll coverage in one direction or another. You've got to give both of those guys their proper respect. You really have something to work with there. And if, again, watching him kind of muscle Jacoby Johnson, who we know is a gigantic corner, and you're like, oh, okay, that's something to kind of watch there. So I thought that was super impressive. And, Eddie, watching the video, you guys had a Michael Fasusi. Holy
incredible.
cow.
Incredible.
Eddie, I saw the guy 4 months ago, and he didn't look like that. The work that he is putting in and that they're putting him through is very impressive.
We're going to go back out there today on Monday, but I'm making it an oath to get more of David Stone as well, because he looked incredible in just the very limited time that we saw him on Thursday of last week when Oklahoma opened up spring football. So, all right, plenty of coverage to come or to continue coming out of Future Freaks weekend. Chad Simmons, Steve Wiltzfong, and Josh have done a spectacular job covering all the hot spots, though. It sounds like what was a very successful weekend, and we will be back. We'll talk to you again, I believe, on Wednesday, Josh, when we reconvene for the unofficial 40 coming up middle of the week. So we appreciate it. We will talk to you next time. For Josh, I'm Eddie. We'll be here on the Soonerscoop.com YouTube channel. Talk to you then.